Welcome to Job Tales, the show where I interview people from all over the world about their profession. Through my podcast, I wish to inspire you by giving an overview of all the jobs existing out there, or almost all of them. Companies are soliciting more and more assistants to help their teams be more effective in their leadership roles. This could be around topics of diversity and inclusion, supporting teams to unlock leadership potential, or to facilitate new home office practices. Diana Orejas, welcome to the show. You are the right person to talk to understand the job of executive facilitator. My straight question to you is, at this point in your life, would you ever thought to become an executive facilitator?
Not for your life. I'm an introvert, so standing in front of an audience of top executives wouldn't have been not even in my dreams, but it would have been like my worst fear.
Nightmare. It's like, what do I had to do? Okay, so that's already putting the first couple of keywords to the table, which is introverts like the way you are, and does it affect actually the job you choose? And then sometimes maybe just the job chooses you, because despite the fact that you're an introvert, you actually speak in front of a public. So let's step back to understand what it means to be a leadership or executive facilitator.
So basically, you sit down or you stand up in front of a team of top managers to discuss with them and to facilitate a discussion. That's why the facilitator word goes in there. So you're not really a trainer, you're not really teaching anything. You are facilitating a conversation and asking tough questions that, because you're an outsider, you don't have any fear to ask. So that's what a facilitator does.
Okay. Well, can you give me an example of a few questions you would ask, like those difficult ones?
It depends on what you're facilitating when you're doing strategy. So often there are elephants in the room about maybe the sector, or maybe about the internal dynamics of the team, or lately it's all about the fear of technology. So it's always, you always have conversations before to try to understand, and you always find things that they are not talking about. So those are the things that you bring to the table in a kind of non-threatening way.
Okay. Does it always have to do with a certain difficulty or an issue that the organization or the company has? Is that your starting point?
Often it will be. Sometimes it's just something that they want to explore. So maybe you're asked to help with a decision about entering a new market, or about how to handle a particularly tricky restructuring. So it might be something that you do because it's a challenge, or it might be something that they want to explore, and perhaps they don't do anything about it, but at least they have the conversation.
Okay. Now, it makes me think that in order to resolve, issues or find clarity, you would have to know the subject that they're discussing, or do you, as a facilitator, are you actually okay with not knowing what they're talking about?
It's something in between. So there are things you don't know about, because I work with all kinds of sectors. So I don't know about many sectors. I'm not an expert in every sector.
Right.
Also, I'm not an expert in every area of business. So maybe sometimes it's more marketing, sometimes it's more finance, and I'm not an expert in either of those.
Okay.
So what you really do have to have knowledge about is process. So the content is not so important, because they bring the content. But what you have to do is to really listen carefully. So soft skills are very important, and focus on creating the process that will maximize getting out all of that content, all of that expertise that is already in the room.
I see. Do you happen to also do negotiations, or is a facilitator something completely different?
I think it's different. A negotiator often mediates, and so is more a mediation role. A facilitator, but often, I mean, I am saying no, but at the same time, the job is it requires so much adaptation through the process that sometimes you find yourself with different hats. Like you take a little bit of consulting and a little bit of negotiator and a little bit of negotiating, but per se, the role is different from a negotiator.
Okay. From a knowledge point of view, what is it that you need to know in terms of really skills that you need to craft in order to become a leadership facilitator?
Well, first of all, you need to know about what businesses do. So, knowing how a business operates and understanding the world of business is very, very important.
Hmm.
Understanding that different sectors operate in different ways, but there are many commonalities in between. Economics and just knowing about the environment is very important because, the global context affects how organization works. Human dynamics, I think that would be the
Hmm.
biggest issue. You need to know how human dynamics may affect how things work within the organization, but also the dynamics within the room. So I would say that, again, the soft skills are the area of knowledge that makes the biggest impact.
Biggest difference. Okay. And I
Yeah.
imagine also being an observer, being able to listen without judgment and object with objectivity. Does that count as
Yes, and curiosity. Before I
curiosity?
do any project, I like to talk to as many people as I can, to get different perspectives on
Mm.
the on whatever it is. And there you can read a lot between the lines. You also get opinions that are contradictory, so that you can bring that to the table. So, curiosity, asking questions, learning. Because I think, you think a facilitator would, you ask me, what knowledge do you need to have, but actually is more how ready are you to learn, because in the process you are learning as along with the people in the room.
Okay. So, do they teach you all of that at school or university?
Yes and no. I think in university you can learn about curiosity, you can learn about how to make good questions, you can learn about how to listen better. I mean, there is plenty of things written about how to be open, curious, flexible, adaptive, all these kinds of things. There is also the things that you can learn in school about how business works. The rest, I think, is practice. You just get up there and you try things and see how they go. But remaining open and curious, I think that you can learn in school, because when you learn about any topic, as new knowledge comes forward, depending on how open you are to different ways of seeing something, you
Mhm.
learn more or less.
Yeah, for sure. So, because you said at the beginning that you were never imagined to be doing this today, what is it that you wanted to do back during your educational years?
I think I never consciously decided. I come from a background of a family business. Our family business turns 100 years this year.
Oh,
And so I was groomed to be a businesswoman. I was
okay,
groomed to be the next CEO of the family business, because I was the oldest of my siblings. And
okay.
so I never questioned that I would study business. I just knew I would.
Okay, all right. And what was it? What's the sector of your family business?
So it's transportation, public
Okay,
transportation and private transportation. Throughout the years, like most family business, we have dabbed into other sectors with more or less success,
yeah.
sometimes less.
Okay, so yeah, you were breathing business before you even started driving, probably.
Yes,
I guess.
exactly.
Okay, okay, so it's a good start. So business was the path that was kind of destined and decided for you. And did you work in your family business?
Yes, I joined straight out of college. I went back to the family business and I loved working in it. But
Hmm.
my curiosity drove me to start thinking about doing international business, because it's a very local, very national kind of sector.
Yeah.
And so I didn't last very long.
Okay, so you decided to do more studies in international business.
Yeah, I decided to do a master's in international economics and international relations, and I
Mm.
went to the States, and that took me in a completely different direction.
Ah, okay, okay. So, and after that, just to understand a bit the path that took you to then facilitating.
So it was actually the master's that took me in that path. When I joined my master's at Johns Hopkins, I was one of the few students that had economics as background, business and economics, and I was asked to be the teaching assistant for international trade. And I resisted. I said, no way, no way, no way. And my professor, he insisted. He said, Diana, I need someone. You're the only one that has the background. Please, please do it. And my classmates were saying, Diana, you have to do it. We don't understand anything. So I finally said yes. And one of my best friends gave me a Prosecco and pushed me into the classroom for my first class because I wouldn't even go in.
Of course, because you're an introvert.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so was that the first your first experience in front of a public?
Yeah, so I was there in front of an audience of 50 graduate students in front of
Hmm.
my blackboard and completely frozen. And within 10 minutes, I realized I had been born to do that. I enjoyed it
Ah,
very much. And the Prosecco,
amazing.
I think, helped. But
All right, so that's good news for introverts,
yeah.
everyone. That you can love it. It can
Mm.
happen that you love it. Okay, so that was it. And then I believe when we were talking before the interview, you had quite an extensive experience then at the United Nations. Did it come afterwards?
Yes, when I was when I finished my masters, I took a different direction. I stopped facilitating or training or being in front of an audience. I was doing economic research but always in international trade, and so that took me off that path for 4 years. And then I had a friend who was at the UN in Geneva, and he said, "Diana, I just work with an organization, and I think you would love it because they work with small and medium companies, and they are mostly family businesses, and they work in international trade, trying to help them to internationalize. So I think you
Mm,
would be fantastic." And so I applied.
yes, awesome. And that was history. And then you spent a few years at the United Nations.
Yeah, so then I joined the UN, and there I loved my job because I went back to then facilitating because there I was basically working all around the world with top management teams of family businesses and small and medium enterprises and organizations all around the world, helping them to design strategies to become competitive internationally and to improve their competitiveness. So again, I was in front of an audience of people from different
Mm.
sectors, different organizations.
Okay, so you do really have a background with SMEs and then understanding how business works and what's the strategy. So, was it an easy step for you to move from the UN to become an independent facilitator?
It was kind of a natural step because as a UN staff member, I was working with a lot of independent consultant and facilitators because we had projects all around the world, and they needed to facilitate in different languages. So I had a big network of independent facilitators, and I was
Mm,
getting a little bit frustrated with the bureaucracy of big organizations like the UN, and so
right.
I started thinking maybe I can do the same type of work without the bureaucracy. So I talked to some of those consultants that once had worked for me, and I started to work for them instead as an
Ah,
independent
how,
myself.
how funny. What goes around comes around, and
Exactly.
awesome. So, how long has it been now since you've been an independent
So I left the
facilitator?
UN in 2005. So it's been almost
Hmm.
20 years.
Wow, the time goes by, yeah. So you look back now, 20 years. What can you tell me that is, something, maybe some lesson learned that our listeners could benefit from if they want to take this path? How could you have fast tracked your path, or were there better ways or less better ways to get where you got?
I don't know if better ways or worse ways. I think one finds their path in different ways, and you
Hmm.
always learn something around the on the way. And so I don't know that you can really change your path. But what I would say is that once you discover that you really enjoy something, for example, the 4 years that I did doing research were very useful in order to position myself as an expert in international trade, or more
Hmm.
expert than just having taught in university. At the same time, it took me away for 4 years, and I could have perhaps really looked into that. But I wasn't really certain that I had the skills yet. And so, in a way, I filled my bag with content where I could have perhaps gone a different way and started working with the process, and that might have taken me through a different direction and maybe landed me in the private sector rather than in the UN.
Okay. Are there any misconceptions around your job? That people think that that's what you do, but actually it's not. Have you had any,
I
comments?
think one of the questions you asked at the beginning is an assumption that many people make, that you have to be an expert on many things. And most people, when they think of an expert, they think of experts in content. So an expert in business, an expert in international trade, an expert in
Mm.
finance. I think what we often do not think that a facilitator is an expert in process, an expert in observing, as you have said, and managing human relations so that you can extract the human knowledge and the human capital and the social capital that is in a team. So I
Hmm.
think that's the biggest misconception. I think that you need to be an expert. So
An
maybe you have,
expert.
I mean, I do have a PhD, but it's not the PhD that allows me to facilitate well.
I
I
see.
facilitated as well years ago before I got my master's or my PhD.
Okay. Well, sorry, what's your PhD about?
It's on competitiveness, so organizational competitiveness, business competitiveness, and economic development.
Okay. Okay. And so are there any common threads on the topics that companies ask you to facilitate?
Yeah, and it's also, it goes in waves. Strategy is one that has been, it's is ongoing. It's always about strategy, except the nature of strategy has changed a lot from when I started. As a strategy was thought about long term, it was like 5-10 years. Now a long term strategy is like 1-2 years
It's
because
true.
everything changes so fast.
So much.
But also, for example, lately I'm doing a lot on diversity and inclusion. So how do you create teams that capitalize on the wealth of knowledge and skills that come from having diverse backgrounds? And so it depends a lot on what preoccupies the world. Lately also, well, during the pandemic, I did a lot of work on how do you manage hybrid teams, how do you manage remote teams, all that kind of thing. And now with AI and technology changes, I do a lot of work on how do we integrate and capitalize on technology. So it depends a lot.
Okay. What would you say is the best outcome that can come out of your session?
So I think there are two levels of outcome. The first one is that people work better together. So one of the objectives often when we have, because usually they are long sessions, it's either one day or several days. So
Okay.
one of the aims is always to get people to communicate better, to work together better, to integrate and coordinate and organize their knowledge better, and so that they contribute and they have the same direction. So that's kind of the human and team dynamic side. And
Mhm.
then there is the outcome that they're looking for that has to do with content. Sometimes is, finalize the 2025 strategy or develop a proposal for a new product or whatever it is. So you have those two. So a good outcome is you get the human side to be, so that you build glue to that team, and the content side is they actually get something tangible that they can take home and keep working on with the
Okay.
specific things to do.
Okay.
Very important.
Can you remember in one episode where it was, let's say, there was a difficult session and then the outcome is something you're very proud of?
Well, I have two anecdotes.
Okay.
one one is it's more about the multicultural. So as I said, I've worked all over the world, and I work in different languages, and very often you make assumptions about languages. And so when I was first working in Latin America, I was in front of a very big audience of Latin American CEOs, and I was trying to make the comparison of managing a business being similar to driving a car. So you need to know what your destination are, and you're driving your car. And I use two words in Spanish that can be interpreted in a different way in Latin America. So I basically, instead of saying it's like driving a car, I said it's like having sex with a pig. And and suddenly I had a room of 200 business people going bright red and starting up laughing when they couldn't, because they wanted to be respectful, so they didn't want to laugh at my face. But at the end, they were just rolling with laughter, and I was just sitting there thinking, what's going on? And the other one is more about so there you, in the first one, you learn that actually, the fact that you work with a multicultural environment, you have to be very careful about, even when you speak the language, that what is understood is very different. And so that's very, very important to keep in mind. That was very early on in my career. It has not happened again in any language. But the other one is when you work on building soft skills with top managers, sometimes these are very technical people. I mean, sometimes I have had to work with Nobel Prizes in physics, for example. And for these people, finding the Higgs particle, or how to use, how to replicate the energy of the sun to create energy, clean energy, is a lot more important than managing people. And so sometimes you encounter very hostile audiences who think, this is just missing a useless waste of their time, because it's just not important. The important is the physics or whatever technical side of the job. And then, sometimes you have people saying, I don't have to be here. And so you have to simply say, it's okay. It's true. It's not obligatory. So you can leave anytime. But most of the time, people don't leave. They just need to show their frustration with that. And then when you start talking about how it can improve the physics or whatever it is, then oftentimes the people that are most reluctant are the ones that come to you at the end and say, hey, Diana, this was super useful, and I'm looking forward to doing this or that with my team. So it's
good.
But it gets really tough sometimes.
It can get really tough. Do you think that this is a job that will be, growing in the future? Your
I
job?
think so. I think so, because the world is changing so rapidly that I think we need to stop and think sometimes. And you need to provide a space that is kind of safe from all of the speed of the day, all of the tasks that you have to do. So I think, and I see it in the amount of requests that I get, just getting time out of the office to just reflect on something. And now the people are thinking about how artificial intelligence is going to take all of our jobs. I actually look at artificial intelligence as a tool that we can use and integrate even in this kind of work. So I think it's going to increase, actually.
Okay, excellent. And to speak about, I have two more questions before we end. One is about the extroverts, because you said you're an introvert and then you found out that they actually love it. Now, do you know any colleagues or that will do the same job who are extroverts, and
Yes.
do they also like it? And
Yes, I think being an introvert or an extrovert is not really a factor that determines. It just determines how much time you need to recover from a session and how you recover. An extrovert will deliver the session and then stay after the session to mingle with the executives, and this is for them probably the most important and enjoyable part of the job. For
yeah.
me, is the nightmarish part of the
Okay.
job, to have to stay to the cocktail or the dinner or whatever, because at that point my energy is really low, because I've used it all in socializing with the group. But I don't think for the job itself it makes much difference.
Okay, no, that's a very important point. So introverts and extroverts, they can both enjoy their job. Just that after the job, some stay, and then the introverts that go home and then to
They
get the
disappear for a
energy.
couple
Yeah,
of days.
reading a book or drinking on your own, or voila. Okay, that's awesome. And the last one will be about a personal compromise. Like, do you have any regrets? Do you feel that you had to make compromises for this job?
I think, especially if you do it independently, like I do, where you don't have a big organization that is behind you, you don't have the luxury of saying no. I mean, as you get more experience and you get more requests, you can say no to many. But other times when the business is slow and is very cyclical in terms of seasonality, you are required to be flexible with your schedule. So you have to say yes to things that might fall, on your daughter's birthday or something of the sort. So you have to be very flexible, and you have to accommodate a lot.
Okay, okay. Well, thank you. It was such an informative, very synthetic, very thorough interview about your job. And I'm sure there are enough elements for the young listeners to have an idea of whether they would like to explore more about this job opportunity as an independent or maybe in companies. I don't know if there's options, to work for a
Yeah,
company.
there are plenty
Oh,
of
okay.
companies that hired facilitators and trainers, and even internally in every company, the HR department, the human resources department, often has people that have a facilitator training background to facilitate meetings within internally. So there are a
Awesome.
lot of opportunities, even if you are not independent.
All right. So yeah, that's and then I hope that we have helped young people discover this job, and I wish you all the best with your future endeavors, Diana.
Thank you very much, Laura.
That was Diana Orejas, Executive Facilitator, also known as Leadership Facilitator. You will find more episodes on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcast, as well as any of your favorite players. I always look for new guests, so please send me ideas, write me to jobtalespodcast@gmail.com, and see you next week for a new episode of Job Tales.